Apologizing for my weak voice. I had a recent illness I'm coming off of. But today, the Michigan Attorney General's office issued their report on clergy sexual abuse in the Diocese of Gaylord. And based on this report, I would like to focus my remarks on three matters. One, the victims of sexual abuse. Secondly, the key report findings. Third, what we're doing to prevent abuse from happening again. After reflection on these 3 points, I'll be available to take your questions. As Bishop of the Diocese, let me begin by expressing deep sorrow and shame, especially to the victims and to their families. The painful reality of sexual abuse by members of the clergy, including bishops, priests, and deacons, all around the world has roiled the Catholic Church for several decades now. We know it is a sin that is not exclusive to the Catholic Church, but nonetheless, we as a clergy are rightfully held to a high standard and must give an account for these failures to live up to our call to holiness. Sexual abuse causes deep wounds that leave lasting physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual effects on victims. While listening to people's accounts over the years, I have seen the immense pain that these sins have caused both the victims and their loved ones. Their stories truly break my heart. Although I've sought to understand the trauma inflicted upon victims, I know I may never truly grasp the full depth of their individual grief. The deep pain is unique to every person and can affect many aspects of a person's life, from their relationships to their employment to their very relationship with God. I humbly offer an apology to each victim survivor who has been violated by anyone affiliated with the Catholic Church. Many of you have suffered in darkness for years, and I am truly sorry for that. I know shedding light on this will bring comfort to some, but reopen wounds for others that will be painful. And for that, my prayers are with all the victim survivors. Please know that our diocese is committed to your ongoing healing. From the beginning of the state's investigation in 2018, we have and continue to fully cooperate with the Attorney General's office. I commend their efforts with the intention of providing justice for the victim survivors. I would like to especially recognize and thank the courageous victim survivors who shared their stories. Their actions of coming forward, regardless of when their trauma occurred, will continue to help to hold us accountable as responsible citizens. As difficult as this report is to read, it is important for us as a church to acknowledge this painful part of our history. This report includes allegations, whether substantiated or not, against 28 clergy who either have ministered or are ministering in our diocese. 16 of these clergy are known or presumed to be dead. Of the remaining 12 reported clergy, I want to stress that today there is no priest or deacon in active public ministry in the Diocese of Gaylord who has a substantiated allegation of sexual abuse or misconduct against a minor. In the report, you will find there are allegations against 3 priests who are currently ministering in the diocese. The allegations against these priests involve reported sexual conduct with adults. While none of these allegations resulted in criminal charges, I plan to meet with the Diocesan Review Board this month to discuss the particulars of the report and to determine any further actions. Now, let me share a graph that depicts all the reported allegations, whether involving misconduct with a minor or with an adult, based upon when the alleged misconduct occurred. Please keep in mind, the Attorney General's office states inclusion in this report does not reflect their department's determination that the allegations are credible, substantiated, or indicative of a crime. In terms of when the abuse occurred, this chart indicates that approximately 85% of the alleged incidents of abuse occurred prior to the year 2000. With the Attorney General's and the Church's particular emphasis on preventing sexual abuse of minors, I would like to share another chart that relates just to minors. Again, this graph of allegations from the Attorney General's report depicts the decades when the alleged sexual abuse or misconduct involving minors occurred. You can see the decline in allegations as the Catholic Church began implementing reforms. One of the most notable reforms was in 2002, when the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops enacted new strict protocols for handling and preventing clergy sexual abuse of minors. That's known as the Dallas Charter. I want to again stress that there is no priest or deacon in active ministry in the Diocese of Gaylord today who has a substantiated allegation of sexual abuse or misconduct against minors against him. The two instances against one priest that were reported since the year 2000 were inappropriate conduct cases involving interactions with minors. This priest is no longer in ministry. The names of everyone who is included in the Attorney General's report who has a substantiated allegation of sexual abuse of a minor is currently posted on our website's lists of credibly accused clergy and has been for a number of years. Sadly, all of this information shows the very human side of the Church, which is not immune from the brokenness that we find in our humanity. We are not a perfect church, but we are committed to learning from our past. Continuous learning and refining our practices to build a safer environment has contributed to the decline in alleged sexual abuse by clergy. Although the graphs that we saw reflect a steady decrease of allegations, know that we will do everything to get this to zero. One instance of abuse is too many. Our diocese has implemented many actions to create a safe environment for children and vulnerable adults over the last few decades. Let me share some of those with you now. We've instituted curriculum improvements for seminarians to better prepare men for a healthy celibate lifestyle. We've established protocols to prevent clergy, staff, and volunteers from being alone or solely communicating with a minor or vulnerable adult. We require all clergy, employees, and relevant volunteers to complete safe environment training. We train all children in our schools, religious education, and youth ministry programs on proper boundaries and how to respond if they feel uncomfortable. We conduct criminal background checks on all clergy, religious employees, and relevant volunteers. We have and always will promptly report any allegations of sexual abuse of minors to law enforcement. We publicly announce credible allegations of abuse of minors, and we post the names of credibly accused clergy on our website. And to assist victim survivors, we have a victim assistance coordinator available to respond to their needs, whether it's psychological counseling from a licensed therapist or a private meeting with me. The diocese is committed to helping victim survivors to heal. Personally, I will ensure that the Diocese of Gaylord not only continues these safe environment practices, but looks for ways to continuously strengthen them. In closing, on behalf of the Diocese of Gaylord, I ask forgiveness for the sinful wrongdoings of the priests and deacons named in this report who violated their sacred office, and for any way the church leadership did not live up to our noble call. I encourage anyone who suffered clergy abuse or has not yet reached out to please share your story with the Attorney General's office, the local authorities, or our Victim Assistance Coordinator. We have and will continue to work closely with law enforcement. We will seek justice for all. We will help those abused to heal in body, mind, and spirit. We will uphold our stringent safe environment practices and look for ways to continuously strengthen them. We will always strive to prevent clergy sexual abuse from ever happening again in the Diocese of Gaylord. Finally, I would ask all to turn to God in prayer. Pray for the healing of all the victim survivors who have suffered. Pray for the respectful priests and deacons who do serve faithfully. Pray for the church that we will be purified by this trial, and that I as the diaconal servant of Jesus. So having reflected on the victim survivors, the key report findings, and our efforts to prevent abuse, I will now take any of your questions.
Can people who feel they've been the victim of sexual abuse, can they feel confident that you and the church will take their charges seriously?
Yes, I would very much hope so. It's such a very important part of what I know my role as the bishop is, and the environment that we've created, again, since the Dallas Charter was established in 2002, with very strict protocols that have to be adhered to, and has built a culture for the last 20 plus years. So any victim that would come forward would receive the pastoral care that is due.
I know these actions over the past 20 years taken by the diocese for these allegations. Do you foresee more evolutions in these actions in the future?
Well, there's probably evolution at a number of levels, including at the Vatican level with Pope Francis's ongoing modifications of what protocols there are, for example, with reporting of abuse of a bishop and how to follow standards like that. In addition to the universal church level, the USCCB, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, also will be continuing to advance ways that will further the safe environment protocols. And again, then at the local level, at the diocesan level, we too will be looking for ways that we can strengthen those practices. We feel we have a strong safe environment protocol, as it was outlined in some of that report right now, but there will always be ways to improve.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. First, just on a factual thing, and I may have heard it wrong, but I believe you said that a lot of the priests were dead or presumed dead. I found that interesting bit of vocabulary. I was wondering if you think that, if you're just hedging your bets, or if that actually is something.
Yeah, the presumed, I don't know for sure if they're not all diocesan priests. Some of the priests were from outside of the diocese, and we don't have as much of a connection. Obviously, we would know if it was a diocesan priest, but there are several religious order priests, or those that had come in and served only for a period of time and then left. And to my knowledge, the Attorney General's office or our own investigation couldn't make that exact determination, so that's why we added that language. Just, it wasn't for the vast majority by any means.
Gotcha, thank you. And then I guess my other question is just sort of related to the graph here, decades when alleged abuse occurred versus reported. Obviously, I feel like this refers to a couple things. There's obviously people reporting their experiences, but there is also the diocese reporting to law enforcement. And it's very clear that collaboration has increased lately. I was wondering if you could speak to anything. Was anything discussed with the Attorney General's office about 20th century conduct of the diocese, and whether or not allegations that came at that time was reported to law enforcement?
You know, we work very closely with the Attorney General's office, and we had our legal team involved with a lot of the updating of what we've done as a church to implement the protocols, that I think we've seen those improvements and allow that relationship to be strengthened between the church and civil authorities, and be able to have accountability that's very much in the foreground of any allegation that comes to our attention. So I could just assure you that I know that our legal team, and as we did a lot of back and forth over these last 5 years, but most especially more recently since early November, when we were working very closely with the Attorney General's office, that we try to do our best to keep them abreast of all of the ways that we as a church have been trying to establish our protocols in a way that is responsive to the allegations that come in and our desire to cooperate with the civil authorities. I'm not sure if that answered the question, if there's something more.
I guess it's, you know, I don't know the story of the Gaylord Diocese specifically. I only know broad strokes of things that happened when I was younger in the early 2000s, especially in relation to Boston, for example.
Right.
But a running theme in the pop culture's memory of these things is that things were reported, that there were some things reported in the 20th century, although it wasn't as common back then, and that things were often potentially tampered down, either by church officials in certain places or by law enforcement that might be well tied in the community. I am not saying anything about the community of Gaylord in any respect, because I'm not from here originally and I don't know. But I'm just wondering, has there been any reflection on, you know, for things that were reported back then, were those things reported? Is there any way to know that those things were reported to law enforcement at the time and that things were handled as we expect them to be handled now at the time?
Well, I think that the Attorney General's report would have included what they thought was relevant in terms of the reporting in the report itself. And again, prior to that year 2020 charter took effect and new protocols began in earnest, that bishops, or the way the church handled things, were not at that same level of the protocol. So, you know, whether it was handled more internally, and there are things that were still followed and tried to, you know, come to a resolution, that it didn't follow the same strict protocols. But I can, you know, just testify that there would have been a pastoral response to any allegation that came in, and every bishop and everyone who would have dealt with those allegations would have proceeded according to what was required by the church at that time. Are there any further questions?
I'm good.
Okay, there are no further questions, and I thank you for the time that you spent coming to this press conference.
Thanks. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. Good to see you too.
Julie's got your phone in her pocket. Thank you. Very nice. And take it if you want. Once we get them all out and settled, maybe I'll call you and do the video.
Okay.